or give me death.
Our first witness is Lieutenant Colonel Jason Amerine. Lieutenant Colonel Amerine serves in the United States Army and led a Special Forces team in Afghanistan in 2001, for which he received a Purple Heart and Bronze Star with V device, which denotes participation in acts of heroism involving conflict with an armed enemy. Lieutenant Colonel Amerine has raised concerns about hostage recovery efforts to Congress. Lieutenant Colonel Amerine.
Thank you, sir. Warren Weinstein is dead. Colin Rutherford, Josh Boyle, Caitlin Coleman, and the child she bore in captivity remain hostages in Pakistan. I used every resource available, but I failed them. One of those resources was my constitutional right to speak to members of Congress. You passed the Military Whistleblower Protection Act to ensure such access. But after I made protected disclosures to Congress, the Army suspended my clearance, removed me from my job, and sought to court-martial me. As a soldier, I support and defend the Constitution of the United States in order to have a government in which the voices of the people are heard. My team had a difficult mission, and I used all legal means available to recover the hostages. You, the Congress, were my last resort. But now I'm labeled a whistleblower, a term that's both radioactive and derogatory. I'm before you because I did my duty, and you need to ensure all in uniform could go on doing their duty without fear of reprisal. Let me be clear. I never blame my situation on the White House. My loyalty is to my Commander-in-Chief as I support and defend the Constitution. Whatever I say today is not as a Republican or a Democrat, but as a soldier without allegiance to any political parties. In early 2013, my office was asked to help get Sergeant Bergdahl home. We audited the recovery effort and determined that the reason the effort failed for 4 years was because our nation lacked an organization that can synchronize the efforts of all our government agencies to get our hostages home. We also realized that there were civilian hostages in Pakistan that nobody was trying to free, so we added them to our mission. I assessed that both issues were caused by an evolutionary misstep that created stovepipes of our federal agencies. The Department of Defense faced this problem in the 80s as Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines operated independently of one another, leading to the Goldwater-Nichols Act of 1986. Transformation on that scale literally takes an act of Congress. To get the hostages home, my team worked 3 lines of effort: fix the coordination of the recovery, develop a viable trade, and get the Taliban back to the negotiating table. My team was equipped to address the latter 2 of those tasks, but fixing the government's interagency process was obviously beyond our capability. Recovering Sergeant Bergdahl was a critical step to carrying out our Commander-in-Chief's objective of ending the longest war in American history. So I went to Congress in order to repair a dysfunctional bureaucracy to support our president. It caused the Army to place me under criminal investigation. I spoke to Representative Duncan Hunter because he's a member of the House Armed Services Committee. I needed him to buttress our efforts with 2 simple messages. The hostage recovery effort was broken, and because of that, 5 hostages and a prisoner of war had little hope of escaping Pakistan. It started to work. His dialogue with the Department of Defense led quickly to the appointment of Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Policy Lumpkin as a hostage recovery coordinator for the Pentagon. This step enabled the DoD to act decisively on the Bergdahl trade once the Taliban sought a deal. But the civilian hostages were forgotten during negotiations. I continued to work with Representative Hunter to try to get them home. He set up a meeting between my office and the FBI. Then the FBI formally complained to the Army that information I was sharing with them was classified. It was not. The Department of Defense Inspector General has since reviewed the information through my DoD IG complaint and confirmed it was not classified through a joint staff review. But still, I'm under investigation. A terrible irony, a horrible irony is that my security clearance was suspended on January 15th, the day after Warren Weinstein was killed. We were the only effort trying to free all the civilian hostages in Pakistan, and the FBI succeeded in ending our efforts the day after a U.S. drone strike killed Warren Weinstein. Am I right? Is the system broken? Layers upon layers of bureaucracy hid the extent of our failure from our leaders. I believe we all failed the Commander-in-Chief by not getting critical advice to him. I believe we all failed the Secretary of Defense, who likely never knew the extent of the interagency dysfunction. But now I'm considered a whistleblower for raising these issues. There's been no transparency to the Army's investigation of my protected communications with Representative Hunter. The Army would not even confirm why I was being investigated for the last 5 months until this week, and they only did that because of today's hearing. Danielle Bryan and Mandy Smithberger of the Project on Government Oversight have been a godsend, and Representatives Duncan Hunter and Jackie Spear stood up for me where nobody else in Congress did until today. I'm truly grateful for the opportunity to testify before you. The outpouring of support from fellow service members has been humbling. Worst for me is that the cadets I taught at West Point, now officers rising in the ranks, are reaching out to me to see if I'm okay. I fear for their safety when they go to war, and now they fear for my safety in Washington. Is that the enduring message we want to send? And we must not forget, Warren Weinstein is dead, while Colin Rutherford, Josh Boyle, Caitlin Coleman, and her child remain hostages. Who's fighting for them? Thank you.
Thank you, Lieutenant Colonel. Thank you for your service to this nation. I will point out that Representative Hunter's in the audience here, so welcome, sir. Let me start by saying, as I was reading the testimony, as I'm listening to it, coming from the private sector, where, when you're at the top of a company, it's always kind of hard to get, the information not filtered so that you really get the truth. I mean, as I'm hearing what was brought to the attention of superiors, I'm thinking you ought to be having medals pinned to your chest, not have retaliation inflicted upon you. So what I'd like to ask the whistleblowers here, I want you to very, hopefully as easily as possible, describe to me why. Why were you retaliated against? And I'd like to start with Lieutenant Colonel Amerine. And I appreciate you meeting with me in my office yesterday. I just want to, because you told me an awful lot yesterday, which I appreciate. I think I maybe have your why, but I want you to confirm this. You told me that in the course of your attempts to gain the freedom of these hostages in Afghanistan and Pakistan, you were made aware, it's your belief, that the government did pay a ransom and that ransom money was stolen. And secondly, that you believed you were pretty close to potentially having a deal where we would get 7 hostages in exchange for 1 Taliban leader, and instead we got 1 hostage in exchange for 5 Taliban leaders. Is that kind of in a nutshell, that information, is that why you've been retaliated against, or what is the reason? Yes, sir.
I think that there are layers of this, as I said, in terms of layers of the bureaucracy. On December 1st of 2014, Representative Hunter submitted a complaint to the IG alleging an illegal or questionable ransom possibly being paid for Sergeant Bergdahl. There was a good deal of evidence that it occurred and a lot of questions as to how it occurred. That complaint implicated both the DoD organization and the FBI. So part of what lit the fuse was the same folks in the FBI that were basically implicated in the DoD IG complaint of 1 December were the ones that later complained to the Army that I was sharing sensitive information with Representative Hunter. Another aspect of it on the FBI side was, I think, just the general frustration with Representative Hunter pushing them hard on civilian hostages and their awareness that I was speaking to Representative Hunter about all of this. I mean, he even set up a meeting between my office and the FBI to try to help them out with some of this. And after the meeting, they responded by contacting Caitlin Coleman's father and threatening him not to speak to Representative Hunter again or he would stop getting supported by the FBI. I mean, just an atrocious treatment of family. So the FBI complained to the Army, and for reasons to be seen, there was a bit of a debate within the Army whether I actually did anything wrong. And my understanding is one party, who I just don't want to be speculative, but there was a big debate within the Army over whether I did anything wrong, and that led to the investigation.
Can you tell me a little bit about this? Can you tell me a little bit about what deal you thought you had for the release of the hostages?
So my office worked options. We looked at a whole variety of options. One of the options that we developed was a, we called it, the 1 for 7 option. It entailed 6 hostages and a 7th person I'd just rather not discuss today. So the 6 hostages is actually 5 hostages and a prisoner of war. So Sergeant Bergdahl, Caitlin Coleman, the child she bore in captivity, Josh Boyle, and Colin Rutherford. When we saw that nobody else was trying to get them home, we were working every initiative possible. One was the 1 for 7, and in that we were looking at Haji Bashir Noorzai. He was described as the Pablo Escobar of Afghanistan, and we realized that he actually was just another warlord who was actually an ally of the Karzai regime. We lured him to the U.S. under a false promise of safe passage and basically unsealed an indictment and put him in jail for life. Some felt he was a wretched human being, and others felt he was wronged. As we looked at the options, we looked at 5 for 1, which we thought had died in 2012, as the worst option. And so for us it was, we aren't getting Bergdahl, let alone the other hostages, back for free. Every option was going to be painful. So the Noorzai option for us was one that was at least less painful. So we were able to reach out to the Noorzai tribe itself that we believe could free the hostages, and we made a lot of progress on it. I briefed it widely, but in the end, when the Taliban came to the table, the State Department basically said it must be the 5 for 1. That's the only viable option we have, and that's what we went with.
I can see how members of the government, if there was an option for 7 or 6 Americans for 1 Taliban, and the deal ended up being 5 Taliban for 1 American, they probably wouldn't want that too highly publicized. So, okay, that makes sense to me. Mr.
Concerns is about what the GAO has said. And as you know, in May of this year, they issued a report, and it was about investigations into retaliation complaints from military whistleblowers. It said they took 3 times longer than the legal requirement of 180 days. So that alone seems to me indicates that we've got a problem on the military side. It also talked about the chain of command issue, that service members are required to report wrongdoing outside the chain of command, but that conflicts with other military guidance, and that sometimes that's very difficult, therefore, to go outside the chain of command and to have an independent process. And so I guess if I could, Colonel Amerine, to you, the IG responded to the GAO report by saying that they concurred with the recommendation and they were committed to, and I quote, requiring service investigators to attest in writing that they are outside the immediate chain of command of both the service members submitting the allegation and the individual or individuals alleged to have taken retaliatory action. Is this attestation requirement for whistleblower investigations sufficient to ensure independence from the chain of command, in your view?
I believe it is. I mean, the DOD IG has a very difficult job, and their treatment of me as I filed a whistleblower retaliation complaint with them was first class. It is a slow process, but I haven't hit the 180 days yet. I mean, so the investigation is ongoing, and they're working it as hard as they can.
Well, I'm glad to hear that in your case. And in terms of the complaints that have taken almost 3 times longer than the legal requirement of 180 days we talked about, why do you think that is, and what should the IG do to respond to that, or what should we be doing legislatively in terms of the overall structure of the military side of whistleblower retaliation?
Yes, sir. I mean, some of that is beyond anything I'd claim expertise in, so I have to, kind of scope it down to what I'm seeing. Mm-hmm. I mean, in my case, I had a retirement date of June 1st that everybody was aware of. The DOD IG reviewed my complaint that included the information that supposedly was a security violation of Representative Hunter, and through the Joint Staff, the DOD IG determined that my complaint was not classified, which would pretty much mean the information I spoke to Hunter about, which by design was meant to be unclassified, was actually unclassified.
And it was the FBI that had said that they thought it was classified, correct?
Right. The FBI filed the complaint, and even, in a session with Representative Hunter, basically said that, we had to put him in his place. I mean, they felt that it was one of those things where it was a shot across the bow. Well, they did that with a criminal allegation. So they kind of underestimated the effect of telling the Army that I'm leaking secret information, and that led to, the situation I'm in right now. I mean, on the positive side, the calamity allowed me to share with you aspects of the broader dysfunction I was dealing with. But in terms of resolving this, it should have been resolved with a simple conversation. Before the FBI complaint even hit, I notified my chain of command what was coming, and they told me, yeah, you did nothing wrong. And then somebody more senior, for unknown reasons to me, demanded this be thoroughly investigated. Okay, that's fine, but in 5 months, nobody has spoken to me about what actually occurred. And that's where I think you run into the issue is the only organization that, to me, has actually kind of effectively grinded through this so far is DOD IG. I mean, everything they did I felt was first class, regardless of how they ultimately conclude this in the end. But them getting out to interview everybody involved is very, very difficult because they'll approach someone, and in the interview, who's going to incriminate themselves? So, I mean, I think the DOD IG just has an enormously difficult task, and the timelines are the things that, really they have to be enforced. 180 days is actually kind of hell for somebody trying to retire from the military and start a new career. But from what I've seen, I understand why it is 180 days. But the chain of command on top of that needs to have a role in this where I don't understand why when the Army heard that there's an allegation of me speaking to Representative Hunter, they didn't think that maybe they ought to dig into it a bit before they started criminal charges. And when they deleted my retirement, they can only do that with an eye towards court-martial. So, basically all I could take away from this is they are seeking to court-martial me under allegations of sharing sensitive information with a representative on the House Armed Services Committee. I mean, it's utterly ridiculous in my mind, but, obviously I'm the criminal in this case. So to me, the chain of command really should have stepped up and realized that they needed to handle this a little bit more smartly than basically going after me with CID investigation.
And had a conversation with you at the outset, which you indicate they didn't have. They didn't ask you. Is that accurate?
My chain of command never spoke to me. Mm-hmm. All I got, the only time I've spoken to is on January 15th when this began, when I was told that I'd be escorted out of the Pentagon because I'm under criminal investigation.
Well, thank you, Colonel.
With you specifically, again, can you point to a why? And then I'm going to ask the other whistleblowers, what does it cost you? I understand in terms of this kind of retaliation, there's reputational harm. That's a cost. It's a grave cost. Having a hostile work environment in all kinds of ways, sitting on a folding chair, not having a desk, all those types of things. But I want the dollar cost. I really want you to let us know, how has this cost you financially. But first, Mr. Keegan, Lieutenant Colonel.
I mean, for me, I had to burn 2 months of leave that I had intended to use for retirement leave, so that was about $18,000, because initially when my security clearance was suspended, they moved me out of a top secret facility to put me in a secret open storage facility, where my presence in and of itself would have represented a security violation while I'm under investigation for a security violation. So, I mean, I took 2 months leave just to get out of there and to not potentially further incriminate myself. And then thanks to my JAG, Lieutenant Colonel Bill Ruling, I was able to finally get assigned to a position where I wouldn't be, committing a security violation by going to work. There's some legal fees. We'll see how far that goes. But, I mean, the broader cost to me is what it shows the younger soldiers and officers in the Army. I mean, we always have difficulty with our junior officers and our junior non-commissioned officers showing them that, remaining in the military, working your way up the ranks is something you ought to aspire to do. And, I mean, here are all these officers that I knew as cadets that are seeing what's happening to me, and the example set for them is terrible. And what does it do to the Army? The Army is killing itself with things like this. When you go after people who are reporting significant issues and crimes, when you go after people who are whistleblowing, although I still loathe the term, you end up setting a terrible example for all the other people that are seeing the retaliation. So that's the cost to me that matters, is what it's doing to my Army.
Thank you, Lieutenant Colonel.